we're hearing a lot about technology and how technology is helping transform our industry. As you're thinking about the role of a travel manager today, how do you think technology helps the travel manager really embrace and leverage some of your principles?
I think the benefit of technology is it gets back to this issue of transparency, right? It enables travelers to be able to be totally prepared to understand what their alternatives are, what their options are, to make decisions themselves without having to call in or email in or text. And you know, when your plane's delayed or canceled, and you have to figure out how you're going to get home or get to where you're getting to, you want to know what your choices are as quickly as possible and be able to execute. And I'll give you a funny example. I was in a meeting in Chicago 2 months ago with a team. We were working on a deal, and we were told at 3 o'clock we had to go to Toronto to meet with a bank. So there were 5 of us. Everybody made his plans differently. I called my office and talked to my assistant and said, "Can you take care of this?" She said, "Fine," and I hung up. Other people went on their app. We get to Toronto, we get in a car, and we're going to the downtown, and this one young kid, he was like 28 years old. I said, "By the way, where are you staying tonight?" He says, "I don't know." And I said, "What do you mean you don't know?" And he was on his app. He was looking for a hotel when we were 30 minutes away from the hotel.
So he had no idea.
He had no idea. I would be scared to death to do that. Like, I'm going to sleep in the street, you know. So, I mean, it's partly a generational thing, but he had complete confidence and conviction that the technology was going to work for him. And, you know, maybe in certain cases it wouldn't, but he believed it would work. So I think that's a good example of the power of technology. And I think certainly younger travelers, well, first of all, he doesn't have an assistant to call like I do, so that's not even an option for him, which is actually better because he can do it actually a lot faster than I can do it.
That's really interesting, I think, and a great example of how traveler expectations, especially the modern traveler, are changing. As you're thinking about the principles, and especially this opportunity around traveler engagement, which I think is key for a successful program, what would your advice be to travel managers in terms of how do they stay ahead of those trends and make sure that they're responding to traveler needs as they change?
Well, I think the simple answer is to talk to the traveler. It's really hard for someone who's in a support role, in whatever the job is, to be as knowledgeable about the realities and all the issues and complications of what happens on a trip as the person who's experiencing the trip. And you know, I think that if a person who runs a hotel or a person who runs an airline spends a few hours checking people into the hotel or watching how they board a plane, they would see very clearly what's working, what's not working, what needs to be fixed. It's really hard to do this reading statistics. You really have to have a feel for what's going on. And the only way I know how to do that, and it works, is to actually talk to the people who are on the front lines.
Yeah, I think this is a very personal and relationship-driven industry, so I think that's definitely true. One of the things that always challenges some segment of the travel industry, not every single company, but not every company actually has resource to dedicate to being a travel manager. Or certainly some people who have responsibility for travel have many other responsibilities. What would your advice be for those organizations that don't have that luxury of resource?
Well, I guess they could hire you, right?
Thank you.
He didn't pay me to say that. But I think someone needs to do the job. It's a very important role. And if a company is not of a size where they can justify having a department or a person that does this, I think they need to have professionals who excel at this, who can deliver to their customers, the travelers, the highest quality and most productive experience. Because absent that, it's just sort of random. And that's not going to work solving either the cost dimension or the productivity dimension.
And it was interesting earlier when you were describing the role of the travel manager as actually kind of being that midpoint. They're kind of at that intersection of cost and productivity. What would your recommendation be, and which of the principles would you embrace around making sure that the right stakeholders within the organization value the travel program?
I mean, I think it's everybody. I mean, everybody who would be involved in this decision travel, right? So the CEO travels, the CFO travels, you know, everybody sort of over a director or manager travels. So anybody who has a stake in the effectiveness of this program is a user to a greater or lesser degree. And so they're going to be touched by this. I remember when I was at American Express, we used to have a program where if you were a member of the board of directors, they red circled your account, which meant that you never got collection calls, you never got to see the dark side of anything. And when I found out about that, I realized, well, that wasn't, this is a long time ago. I thought, well, that's really not good because they're not really experiencing what we do. So I told my boss at the time that I was going to remove the red flag from these accounts. And one time at a board meeting, a very important director came up to me and he said, I have a bone to pick with you. And I said, what's that? He said, well, we've been getting collection calls at our house on the American Express card. I said, I'm sorry to hear that. Let me look into it. It turns out his wife had a card that he was not aware of, and she was spending a lot of money. And since he paid the bills and he didn't know she had this card, those bills weren't getting paid. When I had to explain this to him in the nicest possible way, he actually thanked me because he told her not to use the card anymore. But the point of the story is that not having that information, the senior people not realizing how their customers are treated, that insularity really gives them a false sense of what the business is actually doing.
Right, so really that whole aspect of transparency and engagement
Correct.
becomes even more important.
Correct.
Even more important. So I know we're almost out of time, but I have one final question for you. Thinking about your principles, we also have started, as many industries have, is thinking about leveraging design thinking, right? To think about how we evolve our programs and how we deliver value to travel managers and travelers alike. How are you seeing that outside of the travel industry, and how does that tie back to some of your principles?
I think there's not an industry that's not going through this, for want of a better term, catharsis, right? They're all, so many companies are being disintermediated by what's called the Internet of Things. And it's causing companies that do business sort of the old way to fundamentally realize that if they don't change fundamentally, they're not going to be around, or they'll be a shadow of themselves. And so I think Tom Friedman, who you all know, wrote a book that just came out recently called Thank You for Being Late. And he describes a conversation he had with a man named Lynn Wells, who runs, he teaches at one of these military colleges. And what Lynn said, which I think is a great line, is he said, it used to be, we think inside the box. Then it was, let's think outside the box. And he said, now we have to think about there is no box. And, you know, it's kind of profound when you think about the fact that there is no box. And I think those who are able to think without a box are going to be the ones who answer that kind of question successfully.
Yeah, very much so. And I think that's a very, very timely point to end on as well. So I think as we reflect on some of those insights, I think we can all come up with ideas and ways that we can actually avoid having snowblowers in Miami.
Exactly.
So thank you so much for your insights and your time. And I know there is going to be a book signing outside just after this session. So,
Thank you.